The Prince Warriors, Volume 3, Chapter 27, Doors. Brianna was thrilled to hear Ivy's passionate, courageous, outraged voice. It meant she was still okay enough to be mad. "Let me out, Victor, you slimy maggot," Ivy bellowed again. "Let me out, you rotten piece of pond scum." "Pond scum?" asked Evan, one eyebrow raised. "She must be running out of things to call him," said Levi. "Ivy!" he yelled through the door. "She can't hear you," Brianna said. "I tried it before." "Okay, let's get my dad away from the door first." Levi and Xavier shifted Mr. JR to the other side of the hallway. Brianna sat down on the floor next to him. Levi gripped his sword in both hands and brought it over his head, like he had seen Rook and his dad do, holding it out flat so the tip of the blade was aimed at the door. He looked at Xavier and Evan, who did the same thing. "I sure hope she's not standing right in front of the door," Levi said, "or this might hurt. 1, 2, 3. The three of them thrust their swords into the door. There was a sharp, hissing sound, and the door began to flash and sputter, like a television blinking on and off. Then it disappeared altogether, replaced by the greenish metal bars of a prison cell. Ivy stood in the center of the cell, her hands over her mouth, her eyes so big they looked as though they might fall out of her head. "Levi! Xavier! Evan, is that really you?" she exclaimed. "It's us," said Levi. "Ivy," said Brianna, running to the metal bars. "Can you hear me?" Ivy nodded and started to cry, although she was laughing at the same time. "I'm really glad to see you guys." There was no door in the cell, but the sword sliced through the bars like hot knives through butter. Soon there was a big enough hole for Ivy to step through. She and Brianna hugged, both of them crying. Evan stepped behind Xavier to avoid any possibility of getting caught in the hugging crossfire. "Thanks, guys," she said as she broke away from Brianna. "Thanks for coming after me. I thought I'd be in there forever." "Mr. JR?" Ivy saw Mr. JR slumped on the floor, the metal creeping up his neck. "Forger," said Brianna. "Yeah, we need to hurry," said Levi. "We still have to find your Prince Warrior books." "Our books? They're here too?" "Yeah, Victor stole them after he trapped you and Manuel's too." Levi helped his dad to his feet. Mr. JR waved his hand, indicating he was all right, although his breathing was still labored. "This way," said Xavier. He led the others down the fake hall of armor, past rows of doors. Suddenly, Xavier stopped and turned toward a door that looked completely different from the others. It was white with a sleek crystal knocker and sharply angled handle. It looked like a door to some modern type of mansion. His breastplate beamed steadily upon it. "I think this is the one," he said. He reached for the handle and pushed. The door swung open gently, leading to a hallway wholly different from the prison cells that surrounded it. It was lined with high shelves containing boxes of all shapes and sizes, some as small as jewelry boxes and others big enough to hold refrigerators. Xavier stepped through the doorway and peered down the hall, which seemed to go on for a very long way, disappearing into total darkness. He examined the boxes. Some were made of cardboard, some of wood, and some were silver and gold. Names were engraved in the boxes or written on the sides in a fancy script. "Who are all these people?" asked Evan, stepping up beside Xavier to look at the names on the boxes. He opened a lid, and a terrible odor poured out of the box, making him gag. "Something died in here," he said, coughing. "Everything here is dead," said Levi. His eyes had begun to water. He was seeing something the others couldn't, but this time there was no stinging sensation. He was getting used to the gift. This is where Ponyrose keeps all the stuff he's stolen from people. Everything, even their hopes and dreams. "And their Prince Warrior books," said Brianna. Yeah, said Levi. He felt something cold run down his spine, a strange feeling that he was being watched. His eyes traveled upward. Rows of green bulbs dangled from the ceiling, casting a ghastly glow over the long hallway. But there was something else up there, too. Thousands and thousands of tiny red dots. Ants, Levi whispered. The others looked up as well. They could not see the jagged metal wings of the ants, only the glow of thousands of eyes watching them. Levi turned to Brianna and Ivy. Stay here with my dad, he said in a soft voice. We'll find the books. Dad, you might need your shield. Mr. J.R. blinked once to let Levi know he understood. He leaned against the door frame, breathing in short gasps. Levi turned to Xavier and Evan, tilting his head toward the hallway. He put a finger to his lips. They began to walk down the rows of boxes, reading the labels as they went. Levi could feel the ants tracking their every move. When they had gone so far down the hallway that they could no longer see Mr. J.R. or the girls, Evan stopped in his tracks and made a low noise in his throat. He pointed to a row of boxes. Levi and Xavier drew up next to him. There they saw a box with Brianna's name and one with Ivy's and Manuel's. But their names were also on boxes. Xavier, Evan, and Levi, and Finn, and Rook. All of their friends, too. Ponyrose had boxes for each of them. The kids' boxes looked fairly new, but others looked old, the edges cracked and worn, as if they'd been there a long time and opened more than once. What do you think is in them? Xavier asked, staring at the box with his name on it. I don't want to know, said Evan. Aren't you a little curious? Asked Xavier. Evan thought about it, pulled down his box and opened the lid. He let out a breath of relief. It's empty, he said, and I hope it stays empty. I don't want Ponyrose getting any of my stuff. Xavier pulled down his box and opened it. What's in it? Asked Evan, jumping up to see. Nothing, said Xavier. He sounded relieved. Levi's box was empty too. Guess he keeps the boxes in case he ever does steal something. He put his box away and reached for Brianna's box. He took a deep breath and opened it. The book was there. He lifted it out, checking to see if there was anything else in the box. He saw something scattered at the bottom. Dust. Ashes? He wasn't sure. He quickly closed the lid. Then he opened Ivy's and Manuel's and pulled out the books, handing one to each of the other boys. They had to stow their swords, which had retracted to the small Chris size, in order to carry the books. Got 'em, said Levi. Let's go. Wait. Ruach said there was another one here, said Xavier. He glanced at all the boxes, his eyes resting on the one that was labeled Aaron Santos. This box was much larger than the others and very worn, as if it had been used often. It was heavy, too. Xavier carefully lifted the lid and looked inside. Reaching in among a lot of stuff he couldn't identify, he pulled out a very dusty book. He cleared off the cover. The crest of a Hortos glowed faintly. Manuel's dad's book, asked Evan. The real one, I think, said Xavier. Cool, let's get out of here, said Levi. He and Evan each carried one book, and Xavier had two. The ants still loomed overhead, very quiet, their laser eyes trained on the boys. Levi held the book under one arm and reached into his pocket with the other hand, fingering his seed shield. He figured the shield would be more useful against ants than the sword, and since he only had one hand free, he had to choose. He pulled it out and showed it to Xavier and Evan, silently telling them to do the same. Xavier balanced the books in one hand and took out his seed shield. Evan did the same. Levi turned to head back to the entrance where his father waited with the girls. But something stood in his way, something very large and made of metal. The forger raised its huge fist to grab him. Levi, with no time to think, ducked and scooted under its outstretched arm. Then, with his boot, he kicked the forger as hard as he could in the back of its massive leg. He expected it to hurt, but his foot seemed to have hardened around the toe, so he barely felt anything at all. The forger pitched forward at the blow right into Xavier and Evan, who quickly flattened themselves against the shelves. Evan managed to slip past the forger as it made a grab for Xavier, who thrust out his shield, blocking the huge metal fist. "Xavier, come on," Evan coaxed. Xavier darted past the forger, which spun around and roared, the sound like a bomb exploding in their ears. Thankfully, Levi and Evan had deployed their shields, which muffled the terrible noise. But the forger's roar seemed to signal the Ents on the ceiling. They descended in a flurry of clanging metal wings and flying darts. "Let's get out of here," Levi shouted. The three boys turned and ran. The Ents continued to bombard them with darts, despite the fact they bounced off the shields harmlessly. Levi found it increasingly difficult to hold the book and keep the shield deployed as he ran. The hallway seemed far longer than it was before. He could see no sign of his father or the girls ahead. Maybe they were gone. Maybe they had been captured by forgers and taken off to the prison. His father was so weak, and the girls didn't have armor. He felt his helmet warm, tightening around his head. The thoughts that ran through his mind were instantly replaced by louder, stronger thoughts. "You have everything you need." Levi felt those words shiver down his arm, strengthening his grip on the shield and the book. Then another forger stepped out from the wall of the shelves, blocking their path, its huge red eyes pulsing, its arms outstretched. Levi skidded to a stop, causing Xavier and Evan to pile into him. Levi thrust his shield toward the forger and pushed with all his might. "Resist, resist." Evan joined his shield with Levi's. Xavier turned his shield toward the Ents, which pressed in from the other side, forming a nearly solid wall. "Now what?" asked Evan. "We can't carry these books and fight at the same time." "Dad?" Levi cried out. "Can you hear me?" There was no answer beyond the shrieking of the Ents. Levi pushed against the forger, who moved back an inch or two, but no more. "We have to leave the books," Xavier said. "No, we can't. We need them," said Levi. We won't get out otherwise," said Xavier. He threw the books he was carrying on the ground and fumbled for his kris. Suddenly, the forger in front of them doubled over and collapsed sideways, knocking boxes from the shelves. Levi saw a sword come down on its neck, nearly slicing its head off. "Dad?" Levi yelled, wondering if it was indeed his father coming to get him. The figure was tall, broad shoulders, his face still in shadow. But as he drew nearer, Levi saw exactly who it was. Oh my word, the homemade turtle. Who do you think it was? I guess we'll find out tomorrow.